Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Well, good evening, everyone. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight. It is July 30th. We're almost through the July month, which I know for Alex, June and July has felt like a marathon. It is the heart of the recruiting season when it comes to Gamecock football. And then there's just been so much that's happened over the past couple of months with Gamecock football and Gamecock sports in general. Alex, real quick, what'd you have for dinner tonight?
Let's see. I had Chick-fil-A, actually.
Oh, us too.
Really?
Yeah.
You can't ever go wrong with Chick-fil-A.
No, it's the GOAT of fast food. My wife had a busy day today. I had the baby, and we were just like, you know what's easy? Just Uber Chick-fil-A. So
there you go.
We did Uber Eats. Are you following the Olympics at all, Alex?
A little bit. We're watching the basketball game, the men's game, whatever day that was, against who they play, Serbia. Yeah. And then I've seen a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I think that the next time the men's basketball team plays is Wednesday, actually, against South Sudan, who they barely beat. So I'll probably be locked into that if I have the opportunity. But I have not watched as much of the Olympics as I thought I would. It's not a good time of day. Like, in 4 years when it's in America again, we'll have like the actual, American sports schedule. But it's just a little tough when all the games are happening midday and we're all working. What are we supposed to do? Just look at those 5 rings all day?
And I want to see it live. Like, I don't want to see it at 9 o'clock and it's not live. Like, I just go look up what happened.
Yeah, it's the same like with the Open in golf, like with
Yeah.
like what used to be the British Open, but they play in the middle of the night, so you can watch the replay. But ESPN's already told me what happened. Like I don't really feel like watching it. I can see all the highlights on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. But good to have everyone here tonight. It is 9:10 p.m. on July 30th. Like I said earlier, we're almost through July. Tonight on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about basketball. I know we've had a lot of basketball questions here lately. We're going to do a fall camp preview. We're going to think about the things that will change our mind about fall camp. And obviously, like I talked about at the top of the show, got to talk recruiting when it comes to football right now. That's top of mind for everybody. But Alex, today was a special day for Gamecock Media. I don't know if it was open to the public or if it was just for media, but yeah, so not open
Just
to the
media,
public,
yeah.
just for media, just for special people like Alex. Alex, tell me what you thought about the scrimmage today, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think going into this season, the one thing we knew this team was going to be was probably a little bit more athletic than previous teams, and I think today that was one of the bigger things that jumped out about the teams. Just they're long, athletic, just kind of lanky, and I think a couple of guys physically who stood out were Zach Davis and Arden Conyers. Like those two look like they've made a big jump physically, and kind of sticking with those two guys, like they were some of the better shooters today, and obviously they're doing drills where some of the drills didn't have any defense, but even in the 5-on-5 work, they were consistent shooters and hitting from 3-point land. Which for Zach Davis, that just takes another level to his game because we know what he can do driving the basket and defensively. But when he's knocking down threes, like he's going to be a really good player. I just think I was pretty impressed from what I saw today. It just looks like a team that can, maybe even take the next step this upcoming season.
Yeah, especially with Arden Conyers. He always had that kind of pedigree to him. He's a South Carolina kid. He, long, rangy, athletic. But every scouting report that I heard about him was like, you got to watch the kid shoot when he gets in rhythm and when he feels comfortable. And look, the SEC is hard. Power 5 or Power 3, Power 2, whatever you want to call it now, it is really hard when you're coming in as a freshman. So happy to hear the reports on Arden Conyers. I've been kind of hearing that all summer. And for you to put eyes on him and say the same thing, to me, is a big statement. And then with Zachary Davis, Alex, you and I were texting earlier, and you were kind of saying like, wow, like Zach Davis is like hitting threes, and it's pretty cool to watch. He's not missing. And I texted back to you and said, well, he had to do it in practice last year because he always had the green light in games last season. And it's another thing, like basketball, it's different than football and it's different than baseball, but they're all very similar in the fact that the game really does have to slow down for you. And I think that last year, like maybe in practice where, Zachary Davis was more comfortable, good things happen. I can tell you last night I played in my little men's league game and I hadn't made a 3 in like 5 weeks because, I'm old and the game's fast and all of that stuff. But once I got back to the fundamentals, I could make a 3. And maybe that's where Zachary Davis is right now. The biggest question mark that I have, and I'm going to go through my projected starting lineup here in a little bit because I get all into it. But what were your thoughts on Jamari Thomas and Jacoby? Because those two, from what I've heard, they are battling it out, and Jacoby is not going to walk away without giving up a fight, and it's his time to be point guard in his mind, and we'll see what happens. But what were your takes on both of those players?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about Jacoby and how he's not going to back away from, laying in that starting spot. Jamari Thomas said the exact same thing. Like, he's like, best man win, but he's like, I'm going to go all out for that. And that's only going to make those two better, for those two guys to compete every day in practice. And really, no matter who starts at the point guard, like either one of those two guys are going to play a lot. But just from what I saw today, Jamari Thomas is a guy who I think he can make an impact offensively. And we saw what he could do in the MEAC last year at Norfolk State, scoring wise. But I think with him, the biggest thing he can do is I think he's going to be a really good defender for them, on-ball defender and all that. I know John Whittle mentioned in his piece on the Big Spur, everybody go check it out, about the insider notes from practice today. He just always seemed to be in the right spot defensively, always coming up with ball or loose balls and all that. So I think he can make a huge impact defensively, along with, being a potential double-digit scorer for them offensively. Jacoby Wright, I think last year we saw him take another step forward. He made some critical shots, think back to the Missouri shot, but was a really good player off the bench for him. And, it seems like he's only continued to get better in the summer. I thought he even looked a little bit better too. So, having those two guys battle out for a point guard spot, and no matter who wins, the competition is going to make both of those guys better.
Yeah, I'm a big competition guy. I don't want anything to be handed to somebody, and we might talk about some other competitions here on the basketball side in a moment. But you talk about the ball finding Jamari, and that's actually the trait of a really good basketball player, because the ball doesn't just find you. You have to seek the ball, especially with steals, especially with rebounds, block shots, all that. You have to seek the ball and be in a position to make a play. So to hear that is very, very promising to me. Colin Murray-Boyles, what can you say about that kid? He just projected first-round pick, and anywhere you look online, which is kind of crazy for a 6'7", 240-pound three-star from South Carolina, transferred out of state, came back to South Carolina, and really put college basketball on notice last year. And I think his rebounds, his assists, his scoring, all that's great. But I think back, to mention another game, the Ole Miss game, where the 7'4" guy tried to dunk on him, and crucial moment of the game, and Colin Murray-Boyles went up and got it. How did Colin Murray-Boyles look to you today?
Yeah, he kind of had his moments. I think in the 7-on-7, he kind of had a few turnovers, just a few passes that just missed on guys. But with him, I think we know what we're going to get with Colin Murray-Boyles this season. The guy's being talked about as a potential lottery pick, and NBA scouts love him. And I think it says something about the team that when we watch practice today, you could say that Colin Murray-Boyles just maybe we only watched an hour of practice, so it's hard to get.
You're talking about an hour.
Right, yeah. But maybe Colin didn't have his best day, but he also did have his good moments. But maybe if Colin did have his best day, but we're still talking about the potential of this team because of how deep they can be potentially, just with all the guards and those inside guys. So I think he's going to be fine. He had his moments today too, but I think this team's just got a lot of potential.
What do you think about Nick Pringle? If I can bend your ear a little bit more on basketball.
Yeah, with Pringle, the one thing that stood out to me was, I know we had been hearing about his leadership on the court, and that was something that really stood out with him. Throughout the drills and the early part of practice, he was constantly talking and kind of uplifting his teammates. But, I think with him, the big thing that stands out is just the athleticism he's going to bring to the front court. He's just big, tall, kind of that lanky big man. And it's just, he can jump out the gym too. He threw down some dunks today too that were big time. It's just, he's just going to add another element to that front court alongside Colin Murray-Boyles that can make them really good.
So right before we hopped on this podcast, and we'll actually, before I do this, talk about Cam Scott. Everyone wants to hear about Cam Scott, 5-star, 4-star, best player in South Carolina last year at the high school level. What was your takeaways from Cam Scott?
Yeah, he looks like he's adjusting pretty quickly to the college game. I think with a freshman, that's one of the biggest things. It's a different game from high school to college, and it seems like he's adjusting well. And the big thing with him coming out of high school is he just had to continue putting on weight, and it looked like he has done that a little bit. Still some ground there to make, but he's got plenty of time before the beginning of the season. But showed a pretty consistent outside shot from what we saw, and I think it's another guy who's just going to continue to get better.
So I went ahead and put together my mock rotation, mock starting lineup, just very quickly. I was listening to you guys. I was, talking to some people today, and for me at point guard, I think it's going to be Jacoby Wright until Jamari Thomas takes it. I think Jamari Thomas can take that role, but he's going to have to take it from Jacoby Wright. So point guard, Jacoby Wright, 6'2", 185 pounds, a little bit taller than Jamari Thomas at 5'10". And Jamari Thomas is 185 pounds too. So it's not like he's missing on the weight side.
Yeah.
I think Cam Scott's probably going to start at shooting guard. 6'6", 170. Zach Davis at small forward, 6'7", 210. Colin Murray-Boyles, 6'7", 240. And then Nick Pringle, 6'10", 220. I think that is my starting lineup right now, with the only caveat that I could see Jamari Thomas overtaking Jacoby Wright. But like you said earlier, that's not a knock on either player. I think they're both pretty good.
No, and if I was making a starting five, I'd probably go ahead and put Jamari in there at the one. But I mean, we both mentioned it. It doesn't matter. Like they're both going to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like with that lineup, that's a big lineup. Just a long, long arm, lanky lineup that can be really good defensively.
Yeah, and so then you go into like I've always thought Jacoby Wright and Miles Studi are best coming off the bench. I don't think they need to be starters, but I think that they are starters in the same way that 25 minutes versus 15 minutes or 22 minutes versus 18 minutes. Like you have multiple starters on a team, not just the 5 that start the game. So when you look at Jamari Thomas, Miles Studi, Arden Conyers, and a guy that I think is very sneaky this year is Benjamin Bosmans-Verdonk. Very sneaky. He's probably in like his 6th or 7th year of college basketball right now, but the dude's built like a Mack truck. And if you just need somebody to go in and take up fouls, I think he can do a lot of the same things that Josh Gray did last year for the Gamecocks, but also potentially, just go straight up and dunk on somebody where Josh Gray it took a little bit of time for him to get there. But then after that, you're looking at Jordan Butler, Morris Ugasuk, Austin Hero, Aku Federico. I don't know how that's going to shake out, but I'll put it this way, Alex, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I think in the SEC, the last 2 to 3 years, and even this year, I think that it's probably the 3 to 11 team in the overall rankings are pretty daggum similar. So I see South Carolina falling in there. I know that in the preseason, all the media is going to say South Carolina 14, South Carolina 15, South Carolina 16, South Carolina 12. But I think the Gamecocks will be in a position to make the NCAA tournament again this year. I think that it's going to take the ball bouncing the Gamecocks' way in a couple games, but they have every opportunity in their early conference or out of conference play.
Yeah, and I think in the SEC this year and Texas and Oklahoma, there's going to be so much parity. I mean, you're going to have teams who, maybe only have 4 or 5 losses, but it seems like these teams are just going to beat up on each other throughout the whole conference season. And you're kind of right. Like from those teams from like 4 kind of to 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there, there's not much difference between them. And it's just kind of, as you mentioned, it's like, how does the ball bounce your way, right, a couple of times? And, when you think back to South Carolina last season, like they won games, but they just had some things bounce the right way for them. So, I think South Carolina, you're right. I think they'll fall somewhere kind of in that group.
And John Whittle had a really good point in the VIP room on the Big Spur. Again, if you're not a member of the VIP or the Big Spur, check that out because every Monday night there's a great VIP article. But he said that the Gamecocks kind of lost their closers from last season, and they're going to have to find new closers. But, to be honest with you, I'm not that worried about it because I would take Cam Scott as a freshman making a big shot in a big moment over Michi. Talon Cooper, he was a star. He was the straw that stirred the drink for the Gamecocks last year. I mean, Talon Cooper's one of my all-time favorite Gamecocks, even though he only played for 1 year because he was that good. Mm-hmm. But, we'll see what happens. But, this is still very, very early. I will say that on Bart Torvik, Bart Torvik's website, I encourage all you basketball heads to go over there and look at what he has right now. But he's already done his preseason rankings, and he has South Carolina 53. Last season, he had the Gamecocks starting at 101st in the country, and they ended up in 48 to 43 range. But he has, and this is interesting to me, Alex. I mean, this is all computer-based algorithms, but Colin Murray Boyle is averaging 17 and 7 per game. And then Miles Studi, 13 points, 4 rebounds. Jacoby Wright, 9.5 points, 2.7 rebounds. Zach Davis, 7.5 points. Cam Scott, 8.6. Nick Pringle, 5.3. Jamari Thomas, 5.3. I would be absolutely shocked if the Gamecocks, I'm not shocked Colin Murray Boyle is leading the way scoring, but outside of that, I think there's a lot more players that are closer to 9 to 13 points a game than 5 to 9.
What was Zach Davis's?
Zach Davis was 7.5 points per game and 4.3 rebounds per game.
I mean, he'd be one that'd push closer to 10 points a game. Yeah. I think he's going to be more than 7 points. And then what Jamari Thomas was 5 somewhere in there.
Yeah, 5.3.
I think he's going to be more than that too. But
Yeah.
if you had Miles Studi giving you 12 points and then Colin Murray-Boyles, I think what you said, 17 points a game, like, I mean, you're cooking with gas. Like, I mean, you're doing really well.
Yeah, and that's literally only 2 players scoring double figures, which you could be right at 9.5. I think the Gamecocks are going to be much more likely to have 4 to 5 guys in the double figure range, let's say 8 to 12 points a game, and Colin Murray-Boyles kind of leading the way. But anyway, I know everyone's been looking for basketball talk. I see some comments in here with Benjamin Bosman's Verdonk. I'm just telling you guys, don't write them off. Don't write them off. But let's take a quick break, and then we're going to get into football. How about that?
I said, oh, Lord Jesus, it's a fire. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Emergencies and accidents happen. When you're in the middle of a fire or water event, all you want is for things to return to normal as soon as possible. Resto Pros of the Midlands is with you. RestoProsMidlandsSC.com. Open 24/7 when you need them. Quality that is guaranteed.
Down here in the South, we don't always see eye to eye. While our taste in college football teams, or what sauce, if any, goes best on a rack of ribs, or what to mix with our Dixie vodka might be up for debate, we can all agree there's nothing better than a Southern tailgate. And like our favorite college teams, our ingredients come from small towns and big cities. They're grown in Southern soil, are crafted by Southern hands, and proudly represent the South in our backyard and beyond. So raise a glass of Dixie Southern Vodka to celebrate being made in America and raised in the South.
Oh, man, the building is on fire.
During and after natural disasters or accidents, there can be a heavy loss to property. Resto Pros of the Midlands is here to help. Open 24/7. Call them when you need them. 803-493-0170. RestoProsMidlandsSC.com. Quality that is guaranteed.
Welcome back into the Late Night Gamecock Show. My name is Matt Anderson, and joining me, as always, is Alex Jones. One thing we do know is that fall camp, preseason camp, whatever you want to call it, it certainly doesn't feel like fall right now in South Carolina, is coming. So, Alex, when is the first day of fall camp? When do you have to be there?
Friday. Friday's the first day.
Friday's the first day. So, the first day, they're probably not going to be in pads. They might not get into pads for a couple of days, but there's still things to take away. And what I always ask myself at this time of year is, what could change my mind about this year's Gamecock football team based on what comes out of fall camp? And I'm not talking about injuries. Obviously, Lenore Sellers goes down with an injury in fall camp, preseason camp. Don't speak that juju on me, Ricky Bobby, but yeah, that's going to change things. But assuming everyone has perfect health, what could change your mind? And Alex and I kind of talked about this for a little bit the other day, and we got 5, 6, 7 of these things. So, Alex, let's kind of talk about this now. And the first one, and I don't know if you've seen the update. I did add one more to this, but I'm going to hit you hot right now. Do the Gamecocks go to a 3-3-5 on defense, or do they stick with what they've traditionally done, which is a 4-3-4? And the reason that would change my mind about the team is I think that they have too much talent on the defensive line to go to a 3-3-5, but it was very, very successful at the end of last year outside of the Clemson game. If you hear the Gamecocks are going to stick with the 3-3-5, how does that change your mindset about the upcoming football season, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would. I don't, just to answer the question, I don't think that's going to happen because, as you mentioned, the defensive line, I mean, the interior defensive line may be one of the better groups on the team. They have so much depth there, and being a 3-3-5, you're not going to be able to use all that. But, I don't think if it did end up running the 3-3-5, they got some linebacker depth. I think, just the one thing that would worry me there would be the secondary, just because I think one of the questions is, what's the depth in secondary look like? You got those frontline starter guys, just what's the depth look like?
Well, the question also is not just the depth of, secondary, but when you have a three-man front, it's kind of hard to get pressure on the quarterback. So those DBs have to cover a lot longer. And look, I think that's what torpedoed the Gamecocks against Florida last year. I think at the end of the game, they were gassed. 4th and 10, 4th and 17, whatever it was, 4th and 8. I can't remember, but I don't think that anybody, that were Gamecock fans. I think that game was that at Williams-Brice last year? I was not there. I think it was
The
a
Florida
Williams-Brice. Yeah.
Yeah, Williams-Brice, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think any fan in the stadium, any player on the Gamecock sideline, any of the 11 guys that were on the field actually thought that Florida was going to convert that. They thought that the game was over. And I thought that. But at the end of the day, I don't think you go to a 3-3-5 with the amount of defensive linemen and the talent that you have there. But if I hear the Gamecocks are going to a 3-3-5, that's going to raise my eyebrows. And I'm going to ask myself why. And why? Not myself. I'm going to ask you and JB and Phil and JC and Whittle. And hopefully you guys ask the coaches as well. But I don't think that that's going to happen, but that would raise my eyebrows.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the only way I could see that really happen early in the season if, there's some injuries on the interior defensive line that they just, again, don't have the numbers. But like you said, I just don't see that happening.
All right, so the next question I have for you and for everyone in the chat box as well, and we'll come back around to any questions and comments, but we're still looking for someone to take that second defensive back slot. And if we get into week 2, week 3, a week before the game, and that's not solidified, I'm going to have some worry because, like you said earlier, there are names back there. There are, highly rated players. There's players that we've talked about on the Big Spur and we've talked about on formats just like this. Somebody needs to take that early because you don't want to be going into. Look, I'm not that worried about Old Dominion, but if you don't know by Old Dominion, you're not going to know by Kentucky. Mm-hmm. There's no way. Your iron sharpens iron. And, if you haven't figured it out in fall practice, preseason practice, you're not going to find out against Old Dominion if that second corner can stand up to Kentucky and then LSU later.
Yeah, I think, if they don't have that nailed down by, I guess 2.5, 3 weeks in, means that, nobody's really separated themselves. And, at that spot, you want to have, I guess some continuity just because you want communication between corners and safeties and nickels to all be, rolling and stuff. So, yeah, that if that comes, if that happens, I guess you're right. You probably would raise some eyebrows to that.
So we have 2 questions now. I mean, we kind of talked about 4-3 versus the 3-3-5 or whatever it is. And then now we're talking about the second corner. What is your worry level on a scale of 1 to 10? And I think we know that it's going to be a 4-3, but what's your worry level when it comes down to week 3 and we're still talking about who the second DB is? 1 to 10.
Like a 7?
For me, it's like an 8.
Yeah, that's a 7. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're going to want to have that nailed down by Kentucky. I mean, and like you said, if you don't know who it is by Old Dominion, you don't know who it is by Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly. And the Kentucky game is the biggest test early in the season, not just because it's Kentucky and their SEC, but it's on the road. So they got to figure that out. All right. So I've actually pulled the depth chart over on my right side. So if you see me looking to the right, that's why. But so Gamecocks obviously have, 22 transfer portal guys. I think that was the final number, 22, 21. And they have a pretty promising freshman class, but a small freshman class. So if it gets to, let's say, week 1, week 2, week 3, and we're just talking about fall camp. But if you start hearing that, on the defensive line, that Tonka Hemingway is getting pushed by somebody, or at linebacker, we're still trying to figure out who the best linebacker is. how do you feel about each position group? And I'll just go through it really quick. I want to start at defensive tackle. Let me find that for us. Control F always works. All right, so let's just go through this list here. You have Monkel Goodwine. I'm going to go through the guys that actually matter. Monkel Goodwine, TJ Sanders, Tonka Hemingway, Nick Barrett, Alex Huntley, DeAndre Jules. If you hear that Alex Huntley and Tonka Hemingway are not the starters, does that make you worried or does that make you more optimistic?
I guess a little bit worried just because I guess if those two, you wonder what TJ Sanders, what's going on with TJ Sanders, but I think I guess we can project that the top two on the defensive tackle room are going to be TJ Sanders and Tonka Hemingway, and those are going to be the starters. But, if we hear that, like you mentioned, like a Monkel Goodwine, who's probably actually going to play a good bit this year for depth. But yeah, I think that would worry just a little bit.
For me, like, I don't really care who the starter is.
Yeah,
I really don't. I care about like the top two on the depth chart at each position. And if it's not a combination of TJ Sanders, Tonka, Alex Huntley, DeAndre Jules, I'm getting kind of worried. If, because you can't take a transfer that's not going to be an immediate impact when they only have 1 year left. If all of a sudden they're buried third on the depth chart, I'm feeling like, okay, where's this pass rush going to come from? And then, staying with the defensive line, when you go to edge, you got Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart, Desmond Umalazilu. You know how I do those. I could never be on Jeopardy. Elijah Davis, Jasius Gear, Brian Thomas Jr., and Gilbert Edmond. Like, I just feel like they have enough defensive ends that it doesn't matter. I don't care who's starting. I mean, I'd like to see Dylan Stewart start and put up big numbers because then the Gamecocks can recruit and say, look what we did with this 5-star, but that's not always the case.
And kind of like what you mentioned with the interior defensive line, like those guys are going to rotate through it. It doesn't really matter who starts. And it's kind of interesting. Sterling Lucas mentioned at the Birdies of Beamer event when I talked to him, just, they kind of want to treat it like hockey shifts at edge. And they feel like they got, 5 or 6 guys who are capable. So and they're going to be rolling guys through. So I don't know if there's really too much worry with whoever starts. They're all going to play.
I agree with you. Nothing. Can anything change your mind on the defensive line or how you feel it's going to be right now? Because for me, nothing can change my mind. I think they're going to be a very adequate to, upper level SEC defensive line.
Yeah, I agree. I just think there's so much depth there on in interior and on the edge that they'll be fine. They're all going to play.
So I don't know if you've looked at this. Do you know how many offensive linemen are on the roster this year?
Seems like a lot.
So you got Jatavius Shivers, Big Tree, Kamar Bell, Vershawn Lee, Cam Pringle, Ja'Kai Moore, Marquis Anderson, Aaron Parks, Nee Mansill, Parker Lawson, Mac Walters, Chase Swigert, Campbell Vandeveer. I didn't know who that person was. Jake Wrecker, Blake Franks, Ryan Brubaker, Josiah Thompson, Kason Henry, Torselli Simpkins, and Trevon Ball. I think that you got like 8 to 9 guys that I feel comfortable rolling out. If you were to see Josiah Thompson starting at right tackle, how does that make you feel going to start of season?
At right tackle or at left tackle?
Or left tackle.
I would not be one bit surprised for one if that happens. And I don't think there's any cause for worry there. I think we would know just what he brings to the table, and I think he could be a day one starter and not really skip a beat on the offensive line.
Yeah, so okay, let's go through left tackle to right tackle. Like, tell me who you think the starters are going to be.
All right, I'll go with Josiah starting.
Okay.
At left tackle, at left guard, Torselli Simpkins.
Okay.
Possibly. Center Vershawn Lee. Right guard Trevon Ball. Right tackle Kason Henry.
Okay, so I didn't hear Big Tree in there.
I mean, he could easily win that left tackle battle just with his experience and all that. So let's do it like a depth chart and say it's like how they do the oars or whatever. Like we'll just say or at left tackle.
Yeah, I didn't hear Kamar Bell, who I've heard good things about. No Cam Pringle. I don't think I heard Marquis Anderson. I didn't hear Aaron Parks. So that's like 4 guys that I just named off. If we get to Old Dominion and any of those 9 players that we just talked about are starting, what is your worry level?
It's kind of hard because we don't know what's going to happen in preseason camp. It just, who's going to rise to the occasion, I guess. I don't know. What do you think? It's kind of hard to.
Yeah. So for me, I think there's enough big bodies. I think there are enough talented bodies that, Vershawn Lee's going to start. I'd be a little worried if Josiah Thompson starting at left tackle, not against Old Dominion, but on the road against Kentucky, because there's so much communication that has to happen.
Yeah.
But for me, if, I haven't seen Marquis Anderson play in the game. I have seen Big Tree and I have seen Trevon. So, it's hard for me not to see them there and feel comfortable because they've been through the ringer. The other question is, how good was the offensive line last year? And I have to assume these guys are bigger, taller, stronger, all of that. So I don't know how I feel like that. That's really the biggest question mark we've talked about this entire offseason, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Just because there's so many different lineups they could roll out there. And I think the more intriguing position on the offense is just the interior. I don't think we have really any kind of idea how that's going to shake out, because you mentioned all those guys, Marquis, Trevon Ball. All those guys, they could roll through some lineups. And Kamar Bell, you mentioned, who you've heard good things about. That guy at FAU, that guy's got experience and was a really good offensive lineman at FAU. I mentioned Torres Simpkins was a guy who, was an All-American at his level last year at North Carolina Central. So there's just so many different lineups that they can roll through, and, they're just going to have to be challenged to 5 the best 5.
I think at the end of the day, there's nothing that can change my mind on the offensive line through fall camp. I have to see it to believe it. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So another question. I know we're getting a little bit long on time today, but we'll keep trucking through. Where is Luke Doty playing the most on offense? Because if I see or hear him taking snaps at quarterback, I'm assuming he's going to be the quarterback if something happens to Lenore Sellers. I just believe that in my core.
Yeah. I think we're going to see him playing wide receiver the most. But yeah, I think that would raise some eyebrows if you hear that, he's getting some reps at quarterback. I think he's going to get reps at quarterback no matter what, just to have as an option. But yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, because I truly believe that if something happened to Sellers, Luke Doty would be the starting quarterback. He's the only one with SEC experience. Robbie Ashford has a little bit, but I don't think that the Oklahoma transfer is ready. I don't think Dante Reno's ready. And I don't think you can run the full offense with Robbie Ashford. So I think that Luke Doty would be the person that I'm most looking forward to seeing what he's doing. Because if he's a wide receiver, it tells me the coaches feel pretty good about the quarterback room. If he's still taking reps at quarterback, then I'm a little concerned. All right. So another one, if you see Mazio Bennett as a starting wide receiver at any point through fall camp or against Old Dominion, how does that make you feel about the wide receiver room?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think Mazio is really good and going to be really good. And I guess it wouldn't surprise me for him to be a starter. I guess you would just wonder what's going on with the other transfer receivers, because they get brought 5 in, I think. So I think that would be the question for me, is just who or what's going to happen with those transfer wide receivers.
If I see Mazio starting, I think the thing that changes my mind is that the transfer wide receivers just aren't better than him, and then it's how does the depth look? That would, because I think the wide receiver depth is going to be pretty daggum good. Mm-hmm. I think that, Lenore Sellers is going to have, completions to 22 guys this year. I'm just throwing a number out there, but I think that it'll be kind of like that. So I don't know if Mazio Bennett starting a wide receiver changed my mind. I think I'm more in the camp of you as, okay, he's probably just better, and don't you want the better player to play?
Yeah.
Who's going to take the number 2 running back slot? We've all heard about the Howard kid. Oscar Attaway has the experience. I think we all believe that Rocket Sanders is going to be the starter. I do think, though, if we get into fall camp in week 2, week 3, week 4, I keep hearing about Rocket Sanders taking a day off or Rocket Sanders needs some treatment. That's going to make me pretty daggum worried.
Yeah, obviously you would just worry about how healthy is he if you're hearing that he's having to take days off or not. So yeah, it would be pretty key as to who that number 2 running back is. Is it Oscar Attaway? Is it Jordan Howell? Is DJ Braswell taking the next step? Matthew Fuller, even though he's I think he probably just still has a little bit of transition to get from high school to college, just him coming this summer. But yeah, that would be worrisome if we do hear that.
Yeah, I'd be a little worried, and that would kind of change my mind on the team. As far as who wins the kick returning, punt returning job, does that change anything for you? Or you think that that's just a part of the game?
Yeah, I don't think that changed anything for me. I think, like you said, it's just a part of it. And, it seems like a lot of times it's just at punt return, especially, it's just fair catching. And then on kickoffs, you don't get a whole lot of returns anymore, especially when Xavier Legette was back there. They weren't kicking to him, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's what the things we're looking about in fall camp. We're going to talk about it next week and the next week and the next week and the next week until Old Dominion rolls around. But those are things that I'm keeping an eye on, and nothing that I've said is, please don't hear me like speaking this into existence or, me thinking this is the case. It's really not. It's just what could change my mind. But Let's move on to recruiting, Alex, and then we're going to do our previews of the LSU game. We're not going to do Akron because if the Gamecocks have trouble with Akron, that's just kind of silly. But all right, so we got to talk really quickly, Alex, about the Gamecocks losing some recruits. Obviously, Malik Clark was heavily favored to the Gamecocks and the Crystal Ball on 24/7. I think that it was a shock to you, Hale, who drove all the way to the announcement. There were other Gamecock media outlets out there that were there and covering that press conference. What's your take on the Gamecocks losing Malik Clark, and do you think that this is over?
I mean, kind of as you mentioned, it caught everybody by surprise, really. I don't think I wouldn't be surprised if we're still tracking this thing all the way into the season and even into signing day. So I think we'll be keeping a close eye on this one.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, like I think that the coaches have to kind of take a fine line stance on this, because I don't think that Malik Clark woke up on the day of his announcement and already knew he was committing to Florida State. I don't think it happened that way. But that's me speaking things out into the world. Florida State is a blue blood in college football. I've been in Tallahassee's campus. It's very similar to Columbia's campus. And I think he probably had a pretty good official visit. And then, I've been told through sources that Florida State wasn't even expecting that commitment the day of. So we'll see what happens with Malik Clark. We got to talk about Lagonzia Hayward. It's already been confirmed that he was a welcome home that Shane Beamer sent out, and that happened, I think, on I think it was an unofficial visit. I don't think he's taken an official visit. When did that happen, Alex?
When he was the commit or the welcome home?
Yeah.
It was when that Sunday of his official visit, which was June 9th. I'm blanking on which week. I think it was that second weekend he was in.
Yeah, I mean, but it was an official visit. It wasn't like the spring game.
No.
Okay. So, one of the things I want to talk about very, very quickly is these are 17, 18, sometimes 16-year-old kids that are making these commitments, sometimes 18, 19-year-olds even. But sometimes kids get caught up in the moment and they commit. But what I would tell everybody is if you see a welcome home and you don't see a commitment within 7 to 10 days, take that with a grain of salt. Because when it gets further away from a visit or further away from, being on campus for a game, you kind of want to see that commitment take place. But, I think that it's obviously a knock on the potential of the Gamecocks recruiting class. And unfortunately, Alex, it looks like a recurring theme at the moment. And we'll see what happens. What's your take on, 2 kids the Gamecocks thought they were going to get, they didn't get, and, where do they go from here?
Yeah, I think with Hayward, like he was a really, when you watch him on film, he was just really good. And then you knew they had a good visit for the official visit at South Carolina, but you still knew that he had Florida and Tennessee visits on the horizon. So it was just kind of wondering, like, can the Gamecocks keep the momentum here? And ultimately Tennessee won that one out. And I think we'll see who pops up in this senior season, because there's always going to be guys pop up. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Do you think there's any breathing room or, anything the Gamecocks can do to get Hayward potentially back in the boat? Or do you think this one's pretty much a done deal? Maybe not to the game, maybe not to Tennessee, but like, should the Gamecock fans be watching him long term?
I mean, I guess out of the two of those, I'd be watching Malik Clark more in the long term.
Yeah.
I guess in these days in recruiting, you never say never to anything. But I would say out of those two, I would watch Malik Clark more than Hayward.
Yeah, and then the other thing that when it rains, it pours.
Yeah.
It seems like Jaden Breaker may be on the verge of decommitting from South Carolina and going to LSU. I know Hale put that out there on the Big Spur today. Anything to alleviate Gamecock concerns there?
No, I don't have anything to leave there. I mean, it seems like there's LSU, offered, I think it was over the weekend, and then just seems like there's a lot of LSU momentum with him right now.
Yeah, the big thing, and we'll talk about the LSU game here in a little bit. I mean, maybe a head-to-head can swing a recruiting battle, especially when a kid was committed, but it's really difficult to try and keep a kid when they go on a visit and then 3 days later they're ready to switch their commitment. It's not something where it's, LSU's been in the background for a while. Like LSU offered and then boom. And I kind of want to take a moment here, if we can, Alex, to just say, I have heard a lot of crap being dumped on the Gamecock coaches because they have a ton of 3 stars. They have not many 4 stars, but all of a sudden, a 3-star linebacker that the Gamecocks, I'm not going to say they uncovered. It wasn't like a gem that they uncovered, but at the same time, like, they got the commitment, they did the work, and a blue blood comes in and is going to steal the kid.
Yeah, and I always thought Jaden Breaker was one of their better finds in the recruiting class. Like you watch him on film, he's got a lot of potential, a lot of upside when he gets to college. And if that ends up coming to fruition, they're okay because they still got the other linebackers in the class committed, and they still had the young group of Fred Johnson and Wendell Gregory. So we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, and it's weird because with the transfer portal now, I don't want to say coaches don't sweat things like this, but they certainly don't sweat them the way they used to. I mean, I think that they do feel like they can find somebody as good or better for next season. And unfortunately, we're in a next season world right now. I mean, it's not like playing college football 25 online and, redshirting all your 5 stars because they're not going to go anywhere in building depth. Like, this is a year-to-year thing. I guess the last one is the Conan Baney kid released a top 2. South Carolina was not a part of it. He is an in-state kid, but he's really an international kid. I'm going to give my take first, Alex, and then you can fill in any gaps. I think that this kid didn't really have any allegiance to Clemson or South Carolina. I think that, it's an international kid looking at a national brand. And I don't know how hard the Gamecock coaches pushed for him. And that's not to say they're right, wrong, or indifferent, the Gamecock coaches, but I never got the feeling that this was somebody that, had the big offer sheet and they were pushing for.
Yeah, it was always kind of interesting following his recruitment because, being at Heathwood Hall, it's right there and, you think he'd visit a lot, but, just didn't see it happen. And it didn't seem like much was going on with South Carolina. And then, there was the visit that you and I saw him on for the camp a couple of days after he was at the 7-on-7, but it just never seemed like there was much traction on both sides here.
Yeah, the last bit of recruiting news probably need to hit, Alex, is a lot of big announcements on deck here. You got Kendall Daniels Jr., Jalen Gilchrist, and the defensive end from Alabama, Jared Smith. I know that there was a national guy that came on the Big Spur today and said that Maryland might have a slight lead for Jalen Gilchrist. Kendall Daniels Jr. is a kid that's kind of down to South Carolina, Virginia Tech. Talked about him for a while. And then obviously Jared Smith from Alabama, maybe trending towards Auburn, but we really don't know. Do you think the Gamecocks have a chance for all three of them? None of them. And I'm not asking you to give predictions. Just where do you think the Gamecocks stand? And if they need to make up ground, on who?
Yeah, I think with Gilchrist, it's obviously a Maryland South Carolina battle, and it's just, I think it's really close right now, and I think there's still a couple of days, and this one may come down all the way to his announcement on Saturday. It seems like South Carolina's in the lead here, and Maryland's made a big push here. We'll just see with him. Jared Smith, kind of the same thing. Like Auburn's recruiting on an extremely high level right now.
They're relentless right now.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the state of Alabama too. Like I think they have 7 of 10 committed of the top 10, and Jared Smith being another one, or the one that they want to kind of, I guess, close it out with. And
like the crown jewel.
Yeah, and they just made a huge push for him. So we'll see on both of those. And I think things look pretty good right now for Kendall Daniels.
All right. Well, the last thing we're going to get to tonight is we're going to preview the LSU game. You guys know how I do this. Head coach Brian Kelly has been at LSU now. This will be his, I guess, 3rd season. He's 20-7 overall at LSU. Prior to coming to LSU, he was the head coach at Notre Dame and Cincinnati. The offensive coordinators they have 2. It is Joe Sloan and Cortez Hawkins. Joe Sloan's the play caller, and Cortez Hawkins, former wide receiver coach at Georgia, big time recruiter, and defensive coordinator Blake Baker's coming over from Missouri, and he was there for the last 2 years. And they have a new special teams coordinator in Slade Nagel, first year. Brian Kelly's 20-7 overall at LSU. Obviously had a great record at Notre Dame. It was kind of crazy when he left LSU for Notre Dame, but they are losing a lot, Alex. Starts with the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, 2 first-round wide receivers, new running back on the offense. Didn't really look too much at their tight ends. Defensive line, they're returning 1 player, a defensive tackle, and Jordan Jefferson. Linebackers, they're kind of returning their core, headlined by Harold Perkins. And defensive back should be improved, but, I mean, this defense was just, a blanket with holes all through it last season. It was incredible how poor they were on defense. And, without their quarterback last year, I don't know how many games they would have won. Garrett Nussmeier comes in. He's a 4-star quarterback, played decently in the bowl game. They won 35-31. I don't remember who they played. Was it Mara? Who was it, Alex? Do you remember?
In the bowl game?
Here. Yeah, I can find it. I got it right here.
I think it's Wisconsin.
It was – said I had it. Yeah, I think it was Wisconsin. Yeah, it was 35-31.
Yeah.
With LSU, nothing's changed. They still recruit at a very high level. Over the last 5 years, they have on average the 6.7 best recruiting class in the country, according to 24/7. So, Alex, how do the Gamecocks win this game in Williams-Brice, and what are you looking for when you look at LSU and how the Gamecocks match up?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting matchup, and it's going to come down to what South Carolina's offense can get done. I think Blake Baker's a really good defensive coordinator, and he was really, really good at Missouri. And we saw what that Missouri defense was last year. So he's obviously going to bring some new things to them, and we'll see how they take the next step. They got some linebackers returning. Harold Perkins and Greg Penn, like those guys are probably their top 2 linebackers, but they still had some holes to fill on the defensive line and the safeties, and I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting to see who steps up for them and what they look like when they come to Williams-Brice on that side.
Do you think it's better for the Gamecocks that this is not a night game?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it matters, to be honest. Like, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know either. I mean, I think that, under Shane Beamer, unfortunately, the Gamecocks have had a lot of duds on night games, and Will Muschamp as well, outside of, the Tennessee game a couple years ago, which is, one of the most electrifying scenes in Williams-Brice Stadium in 10 plus years. It feels like. I think it's probably better it's not a night game. I mean, definitely if it was in Death Valley, it's better it's not a night game. But I don't know. This is like the pivotal point of the season because you have Old Dominion, then you have at Kentucky, LSU at home, and then Akron. I think that's the order.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's the order.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Gamecocks are guaranteed for 2 wins. I feel pretty confident in saying. And then at Kentucky, we talked about this last week. I think that if the Gamecocks beat Kentucky and they come in 3-0 against LSU at home with all the question marks that LSU has, I think that it is a recipe for beating a team while they're down because there's no way to sell this differently. You can have, the 6th, 7th best recruiting class over the last 5 years, but a lot of those kids aren't there anymore because they went pro or they transferred. It's really hard to judge past recruiting classes in this era. I just think that Williams-Brice can be electric, and sometimes the Gamecocks catch teams on a down season. I'm not saying LSU's down forever, but I do think that this is more of an 8-4 LSU team than it is a 10-2 or an 11-1, college football playoff contender. I got to see what happens with the quarterback situation and wide receiver because I was never impressed with Nussweiler, whatever his name is, when he came in. At any point, the bowl game is impressive, but it's a bowl game. I don't give much to bowl games anymore.
Yeah, and we'll learn a lot about LSU week 1 against Southern Cal. I mean, we'll kind of find out a lot about them, and it's going to be LSU's first, I think it's their first SEC game. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot on the line, and I think it's probably good that you catch them early just because, as we mentioned, they still have some question marks defensively, and who knows if they'll be figured out by that time.
Yeah, I mean, LSU opens up on a neutral field against Southern Cal, and they play Nicholls State, then they come to South Carolina, and they play UCLA at home the next week. So, kind of weird. They have Southern Cal and UCLA in, a 4-game span. Maybe they were angling to go to the Big Ten or the defunct Pac-12. I don't know what they were doing there, but yeah. And look, we're not going to talk about Akron, 1, because we're short of time, and 2, because I don't know anything about Akron, and I'm not going to ask Alex and me to do a lot of research on Akron. It doesn't really, it doesn't pay the bills to do research on Akron, but that's the first 4 games of the season. And, we've talked about 2-2 at worst, 3-1 is probably most likely. 4-0 is not out of the question in my mind.
Yeah, and it all comes down, I think, this first 4 games are going to come down to what happens in week 2, because, as you mentioned, South kind of goes and finds a way to win at Lexington. You got a decent shot at starting 4-0. I mean, I guess we can go ahead and count the Akron game as a win. And the LSU game is not going to be easy, but, that week 2 game is critical, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and Alex and I, we're going to have an episode where we go through our predictions for every game. We're not going to do that right now because it's like drafting your fantasy football team right now. Why would you? You just don't know everything. It's why we got to have preseason camp, and it's why we had this episode talking about things that can change our mind in the preseason. But, Alex, anything else you want to tell the people before we get out of here?
Yeah, I don't think so. We're so close to football starting. We're so close. We got camp starting on Friday or Thursday, then it's all from there.
I can't wait. This is the exciting time of the year. I'll be honest, guys. The last tough.
We're this close to making it, though.
And coverage and all of that. But we always appreciate all of you spending this time with us. When you spend time with us, you give us the most valuable thing you have, and we cannot thank you enough. It really warms our hearts to spend this time with y'all, and we'll keep doing it as long as you guys want us. So with that being said, I'm Matt Anderson for Alex Jones. Thank you for listening to the Late Night Gamecock Show, however you digested this tonight. And we will see you next Tuesday. Stay tuned to thebigspur.com for all the news that comes out. Have a great evening. Bye, guys.